So Fareed Zakaria is an interesting character. I think sometimes he makes pretty good points, and I think other times he makes terrible points. Well, here he is doing a segment on Bernie Sanders, and he's talking about, how Bernie references Scandinavian social democracies, and he's going to try to pick apart that argument and go, aha, here's why that's a bad idea and why you shouldn't want a system like that. So let's watch, and then I'll explain the multiple reasons I think that this attack is pretty sloppy and also unfair.
I want to talk about Bernie Sanders, who is still, despite South Carolina, the odds-on favorite to win the Democratic nomination. Sanders says that his proposals are not radical at all, pointing again and again to countries in Northern Europe, such as Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, as examples of the kind of economic system he wants to bring to America. But is he right about these countries? Take billionaires. Sanders has been very clear on the topic. Billionaires should not exist, he says. But Sweden and Norway both have more billionaires per capita than the United States. Moreover, inheritance taxes in Sweden and Norway are 0, and in Denmark just 15%. America's estate tax is 40%. By the way, all the data I'm going to cite here come from the Nonpartisan Tax Foundation or the OECD. Sanders' vision of Scandinavian countries seems to be stuck in the 1960s and 70s, a period when those countries were indeed pioneers in creating a social market economy. In Sweden, government spending as a percentage of GDP doubled from the 1960s to the 1980s. But as the Swedish commentator Johan Norberg points out, this experiment in Sanders-style democratic socialism tanked the Swedish economy. Between 1970 and 1995, he notes, Sweden did not create a single net new job in the private sector. In 1991, a free market Prime Minister, Carl Bildt, initiated a series of reforms to kickstart the economy. By the mid-2000s, Sweden had cut the size of its government by a third and emerged from its long economic slump. Versions of this problem and these market reforms took place all over Northern Europe, creating what is now called the flex security model, combining flexible labor markets with a strong and generous safety net. The first part of the model is key, ensuring employers have the flexibility to hire and fire workers easily without excessive regulation or litigation. In addition, these countries have to stay extremely open, erecting no barriers to free trade to gain access to markets abroad and keep their local companies competitive. Now, it's true, these countries have a very generous safety net, and in order to fund it, they have high taxes. What is often not pointed out, however, is that in order to raise enough revenue to pay for things like universal health care, these taxes fall disproportionately on the poor, middle, and upper middle class. Denmark has one of the highest top income tax rates in the OECD, 55.9%. But that rate is applied to anyone making 1.3 times the average national income. In the US, this would mean any income over $65,000 would be taxed at a rate of 55.9%. And the biggest hit to the poor and middle classes in Northern Europe comes because they, like everyone, pay a national sales tax of about 25%, much higher than the average US sales tax of 7%. These countries raise more than 20% of their revenue this way, compared to only 8% of tax revenue in the US. One final statistic. A 2008 OECD report found that the top 10% in the United States pay 45% of all income taxes, while the top 10% in Denmark pay 26%, in Sweden 27%. This basic point is worth underlining because the American left seems largely unaware of it, and it has only become more true over the last decade. The United States has a significantly more progressive tax code than Europe. In other words, bringing the economic system of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway to the United States would mean embracing more flexible labor markets, light regulations, and a deeper commitment to free trade. It would mean a much more generous set of social benefits to be paid for by taxes on the middle class and poor. If Bernie Sanders embraced all that, it would be radical indeed.
Okay, so let's go through that because a lot of that is misleading. A lot of it is sloppy. A lot of it is like inferring that he believes certain things, and the only way you can make it work is if you do X, Y, and Z. So let's go through it. Now, from the top, when his whole argument is basically, hey, Bernie Sanders says let's do a Scandinavian-style social democratic system, but here are the way those systems really work. So the implication there is he's inferring like, oh, Bernie wants to do all these things, but does he know about this, and this? Which are not things he's advocated for, to which I respond, right, yeah, he hasn't advocated for a lot of those things that you're implying he has to advocate for, and he's not going to. So, guys, when Bernie says, he wants to copy the Scandinavian social democracies, what does he mean by that? What he means is, let's have universal healthcare, let's have free college, and let's have paid time off. Basically, that's what he's talking about. And, if you want to go even more broad and vague than that, he's just talking about, hey, those countries mix capitalism and socialism where there's a little bit more of the socialism aspect in their economy than we have. So that's what he means when he talks about let's have a Scandinavian social democratic system. Fareed Zakaria is taking, Bernie's support of those systems far too literally. And okay, so let's continue here. He says, oh, Bernie's clear that he wants no billionaires, but in those countries, they have more billionaires per capita or something to that effect. Bernie's rhetoric and Bernie's tweeting of, billionaires shouldn't exist. Just so everybody knows, regardless of what your position is on that, his tax plan, which is out, it's released, and you could read it, his tax plan does allow for billionaires to continue to exist. Just so you know, there's a difference there between what he casually says in rhetoric and what he tweets and what his actual proposed tax plan is. So his proposed tax plan, yes, it does raise a hell of a lot of money from billionaires, but it does not eliminate billionaires where there's a maximum cap of like $999 million. So that's an example of Fareed being, again, far too literal and not, really looking at Bernie's tax plan and going through it. Okay, so he's just wrong about that. This idea of like, they allow billionaires, and there are more of them per capita, so what's Bernie doing? Right, and Bernie, even though he's raising taxes on the billionaires, he's not eliminating billionaires, even though he tweets stuff like, there shouldn't be billionaires. There's a difference between saying there shouldn't be billionaires and my tax plan literally eliminates billionaires. He doesn't. His tax plan does not eliminate billionaires. He has a wealth tax that's the most progressive wealth tax that's out there, but you will still have some billionaires out there. Another argument that Fareed goes on to make is, hey, big government spending was the hallmark of social democratic systems, and that big government spending didn't necessarily work. There was no private job creation, and so those systems were really stagnant and not competitive and were not good like Bernie is making them out to be. To which I respond to Fareed Zakaria, but if you look at Bernie's plans, the goal is to not get rid of capitalism completely. The goal is not to get rid of the private marketplace. The goal is not to try to nationalize every industry or most industries. The goal is to take the basics off of the table and still allow for a free market economy, but a regulated free market economy where you could still have job creation. So it's not like he's kind of strawmanning Bernie's beliefs as, oh, he just wants big government to control everything. But that really is like a lazy right-wing straw man of Bernie Sanders' actual beliefs. And when you look at his plans, there's still plenty of a market economy functioning in there, much to the dismay of people to the left of Bernie, but that's what his plans are. So you can't straw man it by acting like, well, when they had bigger government in the social democracies in the 60s and 70s, it didn't work out too well. Okay, and that's not what he's calling for. Then he goes on to say, oh, one of the hallmarks of these kinds of systems, which makes it work, is there are no restrictions on free trade. There are a couple responses to that. First of all, those countries are a hell of a lot smaller than the U.S., and they have fewer industries than the U.S. So theoretically, yes, it would be harder for them to exist and be as thriving without a degree of free trade. But beyond that, when Bernie talks against free trade, he's just talking about changing the terms of our trade agreements where they're no longer written by lobbyists and special interests and corporations for the benefit of the owner class and against the workers. Bernie's not anti-free trade, full stop. Bernie is for trade agreements that have working people at the table and environmentalists at the table. We could still trade internationally. We could still import and export stuff. That's all totally fine and dandy. But you need to craft deals that are good for working people. And right now, they're just crafted by the corporate overlords who are screwing the people and have bought the government and are massively corrupt. So again, not really, he's kind of implying that Bernie has a position that he doesn't have. And then he talks about, well, you're going to need high taxes to fund the social safety net. And he goes on to say, any income above $65,000 in the United States would have to be taxed at 55%. Okay, but Bernie Sanders, you keep saying, oh, it has to be this, it has to be that. No, Bernie has released his plans, and his plans are clear. He's not raising taxes on everybody who makes over $65,000 and taxing them at 55%. That's simply not true. He doesn't do that. How about you actually read his tax plan and then critique his actual tax plan? But he doesn't do that, because then he'd have to say, oh, this is a much more progressive tax system, and this isn't a tax system that burdens the working class with taxes, with burdensome taxes. That's just not the case. And let me give another example here. Bernie's Medicare for All bill, does that raise taxes on the working class? Yes, but they save money because he's eliminating the private tax that they currently pay. They pay a private tax. You pay a private tax to a for-profit health insurance company. That's what you do. So if I tell you right now, you're paying a $12,000 private tax to the for-profit health insurance companies, you're paying premiums, deductibles, copays, and all that stuff. I'm going to get rid of that $12,000 you have to pay every year, and now it's going to be $7,000 you pay every year in public taxes. So I'm raising your public taxes $7,000, but I'm eliminating the $12,000 in private taxes. Are you going to take that deal if everything's covered? Your answer is absolutely. So for him to phrase it as and frame it as, oh, Bernie's going to need to raise taxes on the working class in order to get these things done, that's not giving you the total picture. That's not giving you the total picture. And furthermore, you're ignoring the fact that there's plenty of areas where we could cut to have savings to fund the social programs. Cut the military-industrial complex. Cut the bailouts to Wall Street and the quantitative easing that happens all the time. Cut the pork barrel spending, which goes to unnecessary nonsense. Cut the subsidies to big oil, which happen every single year, $4 billion every single year. If you can roll back the areas where we should roll back, you can absolutely afford to do the basic things. Did you know, guys, his free college bill, I believe it cost $60 billion. The increase in the military budget in 1 year under Trump was $80 billion. So for just the increase in the military budget that we had in 1 year, we could pay for free college for everybody in the country. This idea that it's like, well, you can't do it without raising taxes on working people. Look at his plans. He doesn't do that. And to the extent he does raise it anywhere, he offsets it elsewhere. It's about getting a government that works for you, and they keep strawmanning, and they keep smearing, and they keep insisting and implying he believes stuff that he doesn't believe. And it's just, I'm so tired having to go through it. I'm so tired. When he talks about let's have a social democratic system, he just means let's have universal health care, free college, paid time off, and a couple other basic things. That's all he's saying. But Zakaria is strawmanning him like, oh, you must want to raise taxes on everybody making $65,000 or more at 55%. Except he doesn't do that. Okay. And then the final point I'll make is he says, well, listen, the top 10% in the United States, they pay 45% of the taxes. And the top 10% in some of the respective Scandinavian countries, they pay about 25% in the taxes. So he's saying like, wow, look at that. We're already soaking the rich in the U.S. and they're not soaking the rich over there. That's the argument that he's trying to make. What does that leave out? I'll let you think about it for a second. What does that leave out? How much of the money and the wealth does that top 10% have in the U.S. versus in the Scandinavian social democracies? So he's leaving out the entire picture by leaving out that fact. That's a lie by omission. In the United States, You have, the wealthiest, not the wealthiest, but you have 6 people with more wealth than the bottom 45% of the country. Just the Walton family has more wealth than nearly half of the United States. We're off the charts. We have way more income and wealth inequality than other developed countries. So he's trying to make the case that that's not true and that, we already soak the rich, but they don't over there. That's just a bogus thing to imply. It's totally bogus. There's plenty of wealth sitting at the top that can be taxed and redistributed to fix the system, and those people wouldn't even feel it. They wouldn't even feel it. And remember, a lot of Bernie's funding mechanisms for these various plans do come from redistributive taxes from the wealthy to the working class. Namely, here's one, the Wall Street transaction tax. That's how he funds his free college proposal, a Wall Street transaction tax. It's not going to hit the middle class. It's going to hit the people who have all the damn money. So that's what he's leaving out there. That the wealthy in the U.S. are way more wealthy than the wealthy in the social democracies. So even with them paying a higher tax rate, they still net have way more wealth left over because they made a hell of a lot more of it. So there is no meritocracy that we have in this country, and that's the point. And Bernie wants to make it more of a meritocracy. Give people an equal opportunity. Give people the basics. Don't burden them. But effectively, what Fareed Zakaria's argument boils down to is, hey man, this candidate, Bernie Sanders, with his social democratic proposals, maybe these proposals will actually really hurt the working class. Maybe it'll actually raise their taxes a lot and it'll be worse for them. Which on its face is a preposterous idea.